Tali Sharot, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
What is habituation?
So habituation is our tendency to respond less and less to things that are frequent or constant. So an easy example is you walk into a room, it's full of cigarette smoke. At first, the smell is really overwhelming, but studies show that within 20 minutes, you cannot detect the smell any longer. Or there's an AC in the background, but it's been there all day, so you don't even notice it, right? So in the first case with the smoke, it's your olfactory neurons. They stop responding to a smell that's been there for a while. In the case of the AC, perhaps neurons in your auditory cortex stop responding. And just as we stop responding to smells or noise or even temperature that's been there for a while, we also stop responding emotionally and physiologically to more complex phenomena in our life. So to a new relationship perhaps will excite less over time, a new job. There are a lot of great things in our life. But if they've been there for a while, a new home, a new perhaps job, they will not elicit as much joy on a daily basis. But also we stop responding to the not so great things in our life and society if they've been there for a while. So there could be some terrible things, sexism, racism, cracks in our personal relationship, inefficiencies in the workplace. If they have been there constantly, we tend to notice them less. And if we tend to notice them less, we might not be driven to change.
So on the upside, there's what is sometimes referred to as hedonic adaptation, where we get a new car and instead of it being delightful for 2 years, it's delightful for 2 weeks. And the downside, there's what Al Gore talked about as the frog in a boiling pot of water. As the water slowly comes to a boil, you don't notice it until it's too late. And either of these can have noxious impacts.
Right. So we don't feel as much joy in response to the good stuff in our life, right? Because we have habituated, and that's a problem. And we also may not feel as bad to the aversive stuff. And you can say, well, that's great. And it is to some aspect, right? If you had a break of a romantic relationship, you don't want to be in that negative state for the rest of your life. You want to overcome it. You want to bounce back. However, for things that are negative in your life and you can change them, or in your professional life, if you are not reacting to them, you won't be driven to change. And with respect to the frog in the boiling water, scientifically, it's been shown that a frog will eventually jump out of boiling water. However, it's a good metaphor. So there's, the old kind of tale is that you put a frog in a pot of water, and you turn on the heat slowly, gradually. And because it's so gradual, the frog would not feel the heat until it finally just dies. So it turns out scientifically that's not quite right. It does jump out to save its life. But I think the metaphor is very relevant. That in life, we are a little bit like frogs in boiling water.
I'm glad the frogs are smarter than we are. I want to just go back to it. We're going to talk about all the downsides of habituation, but you did reference it quickly there, and I want to make sure it didn't go by too quickly. There are some adaptive aspects of habituation, and it's probably worth at least dwelling for a little bit on what they might be.
Yeah, absolutely. We see habituation in every single living thing, every single species. It's in humans, it's in monkeys, and it's in rats, and it's in flies, and it's every neuron in your brain. When you see a phenomena in every species, there's usually a good reason for it, meaning it's probably adaptive. So the question is, what's adaptive about habituation? Well, first of all, it is important for your survival, right? Because if you stop responding to the old things around you that haven't changed, that means your brain has more capacity and it's ready and has resources to respond to the new things that are coming your way. And those new things can kill you. So it's a good resource saving strategy. So it's important for survival. Now, if we kind of think about more complex things in our life, if you go back and think about your first entry-level job, you were probably really excited and happy about this entry-level job. But if you continue being excited and happy about your first entry-level job 10 years later, then you're not motivated to move forward, right? To try to get that promotion, to try to progress. So habituation in this case, emotional habituation is important for enhancing motivation. And then, interestingly, we see that almost every mental health disorder has some sort of impairment related to habituation. Different disorders have different types of habituation-related impairments. Let's think about depression, for example. So within depression, it's been found that people with depression tend to habituate to negative events in their life slower. One great study was conducted at the University of Miami by Professor Aaron Heller. What he did is he asked students who just got a result of a really important exam how they were feeling. And then he came back to them every 45 minutes for the rest of the day to ask how they were feeling. And what he found was that when people got a bad grade, they felt bad. It didn't matter if you had a history of depression or you didn't. Everyone felt bad about a bad grade. The difference between people with depression or a history of depression and people without is that people with a history of depression, they kept ruminating on this negative event, right? It kept impacting them negatively for a very long time. They didn't bounce back. While those that were healthy individuals without depression episodes in their past, they did feel bad for a while, but you can see them going back to kind of baseline levels of happiness much faster. So it seems like habituation can be also protective for our mental health. So that's the other adaptive reason that we probably see it in humans.
As I understand it, your book really dwells on the aspects of habituation that we should endeavor to avoid. And you have a lot of very interesting strategies. So I think it makes sense to dive in. One of the ways you talk about avoiding habituation to the pleasant or to the positive is to take breaks. So can you expand on that?
Yeah, sure. We asked, you want to regain sensitivity to the positive things. And the question is, how do you regain sensitivity? And the key is really described well by this quote by the economist Tibor Skytowski. He says, pleasure results from incomplete and intermittent satisfaction of desires. Pleasure results from incomplete and intermittent satisfaction of desires. What that means is that if we experience something that is great for a long time, pleasure would probably go down over time. But if we have an incomplete experience, if it's like intermittent, then probably we will encounter more pleasure. Let me give you an example and then kind of talk about, well, how can we implement that in our life? So in one piece of data that we have comes from work that I did with a large tourism company, and they wanted to know, when are people happiest on vacation and what makes them happy? So we went on the resorts and we surveyed people, and we found that the happiest day of vacation, or the happiest point, was 43 hours into vacation. So 43 hours allowed people time to unpack and focus on fun. But from 43 hours in, the joy started dwindling slowly. And to be clear, they're still happy on day 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, but not as much as they were happy on day 2. And when we asked them, hey, what was the best part of the vacation? The word that they used more than any other word was first. The first view of the ocean, the first cocktail I had, the first sandcastle I built. The second view of the ocean was also great. The second, third, fourth, fifth cocktail was quite good, but not as good as the first. And again, why is that? Because things that are new are more exciting. We kind of notice them more. We pay attention. It brings more joy. But then over time, we habituate. And so if we think about just this example of vacations, perhaps it makes sense to have more shorter vacations, right? Make them more frequent, but have them shorter. Have more of those 43 hours in, rather than the long ones. Of course, you can't always do that. If you're kind of traveling halfway across the world, that's not practical. But if it's something to think about, right? So we want to have these kind of shorter experiences. And perhaps one of the most interesting study was one that was conducted where people were asked, hey, what would you prefer? To listen to a song that you really like, beginning to end, no breaks? Or would you rather listen to a song with breaks intermittent in between? What would you choose, Dan?
Wait, so is this a break in the middle of the song or between songs?
No, in the middle. So you listen to a song beginning to end, no interruptions, or you have breaks. About every 30 seconds, I have a 10-second break. 30 seconds, 10-second break.
Definitely hearing the whole song.
Yeah, so that's very intuitive, right? 99% of people said, I don't want any breaks. I want to listen from beginning to end. However, when they did the experiment, they found that those that did have breaks in the song actually enjoyed it more, right? They didn't predict it, but that's what happened. They were willing to pay double to listen to the song in concert. And they did it in other domains. They had questions about a massage. So they said, hey, do you want massage beginning to end, no interruptions? Or do you want interruptions in your massage? Of course, everyone says, I don't want interruptions in my massage. They did the experiment and they found that those that had little breaks in their massage actually enjoyed it more. Why is that? Well, if you listen to a song or you have a massage at the beginning, you're really enjoying it. And then because of habituation, joy starts dwindling, going down, right? You're still enjoying it, even at the end, but not as much as the beginning. Now, if I break your experience for a short amount of time, you dishabituate, right? And then when the song comes back in or the masseuse comes back in, joy pops up again. So overall, you're experiencing more joy in that time. So the idea is break up the good experiences, right? Don't kind of binge watch that Netflix show in one night, right? Break those experiences, even in situations where it's not intuitive. And you can also take breaks from your own life, just from daily life, right? And I mean, some of us just do that as part of our routine. We may go for a business trip or we go away for a weekend. And what happens when people come back from these breaks that they have from life, there is this phenomena that we use the word, actually, we borrowed this word from Julia Roberts. It's called resparkling. So you come back and now you haven't been home for a few days or more. And now everything seems a little bit, sparklier. You notice perhaps your view, you notice a comfortable house, perhaps your loved ones, and you feel more of that joy. There's a wonderful quote by Jodie Foster that we actually found after we submitted the final version of the book. And she describes what happened when she went on location to film for 6 months. And then after 6 months, she came back to her home. And she says, I came back from somewhere that is amazing and beautiful, but you long for really dumb things that you're just used to, that 6 months ago, I'm sure I was bored by, but right now I'm like, my God, avocados are amazing. Or I'm so glad I get to go to the gym again. Things that 6 months ago were sort of what I was trying to escape from. Now everything is amazing. And of course, Jodie Foster has not a normal life, right? Quite a privileged life, but I think she's describing something that is very ordinary, right? When we leave our normal life and then we come back, we see things anew, we see them afresh. So that's the idea of break up the good experiences into little bits.
So just to put a fine point on it, in terms of operationalizing this in our own lives, what's the best way to do it? To try to travel as much as possible so that we're getting out of our habits and routines, and then when we return, it's resparkled?
Right. So you can think about the little things, right? We talked about, maybe if you go on vacation, not a very long one, have little short ones. Don't binge, but rather kind of divide your experiences. If it's about your daily life, sure, I think you could try to have breaks where you actually leave, and for a few days and come back. But not everyone is able to do that. And so there's a few other options. One, actually, this one is something that Laurie Santos talked about. We saw her talking about this, where she says, well, what you could do is you could close your eyes and imagine your life without these things in your life, without your job, without your house, without your loved ones. Really try to imagine it with vividness and details. And what happens is when you open up your eyes again, then things seem to, again, resparkle, to put our term on it, right? You see them in you feel them more, right? So instead, you don't necessarily have to actually remove yourself from the situation if that's not possible. You can do it in your mind. Another way is something that I experienced when I had COVID. So I had COVID for one of the many times that I had it. And I went down to the basement such that my family members won't be infected. And first of all, I found that living in the basement was actually quite an adventure. It felt like a little bit of a camping situation. But even more important than that, after a few days when I emerged back to the ground level, things resparkled again, right? So I took myself out of the situation. I came back, and now you kind of appreciate things more. So there are, I think, creative ways in which we can create more breaks. Now, there's another way. So, okay, the reason breaks are important is because it induces dishabituation. There's another way by which you can induce dishabituation. It's related, but it's not quite the same. And it is to induce variety and diversify your life. So if you think about what makes a good life, so most people will say, oh, I want to be happy, right? That's the topic of your podcast. I want to be happy. I don't want to be sad. Sure. And then happiness is not everything. People also want meaning and purpose in their life, and that's important too. But because of habituation, a lot of time, those things that do induce happiness and purpose can do so less over time. Even if you're doing cancer research for many years, perhaps a sense of purpose will diminish over time, and perhaps the kind of feeling of awe may be feeling more of like routine. But there's this third ingredient of a good life, which people often overlook, and it counters the habituation that causes less happiness and less feeling of meaning, which is variety. Right? So if you induce variety into your life, and actually it's been shown that people who have more diverse life in terms of maybe they lived in different places, they work in different projects, perhaps they interact with different types of people, they tend to have a psychologically rich life, because what variety does, it kind of shakes up your days and it dishabituates you such that you're more able to see things anew. And when you do diversify your life, and it could be, you can do this with really small things. You could choose different routes to work. You could learn a new skill or take a course in something outside of your expertise. When people tend to do that, what happens is they put themselves in a state of learning. And they need to learn, the new environment. They need to learn the hierarchy. And there's many studies showing that learning really increases joy and happiness. People like to feel that they're learning, that they're progressing, that they're moving forward. So variety is another way to induce dishabituation.
Right. So it seems like if you want to resparkle your life, there are lots of moves you can make, from, traveling, but if traveling is not an option, to using your imagination. Laurie Santos, the great podcast host, the host of the Happiness Lab, and Yale professor, talks about doing an imagination exercise that can help you resparkle. Next time you get sick, you can try to pay attention to what it's like when you feel better, and life can be a little bit more interesting in that way. And then introducing variety of any sort. Learning a new skill, meeting new people. Moving cities, taking a different way to work. There are lots of ways, whether you have the luxury of travel or not, to start to see the things in your life through a fresh pair of eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it turns out that if you do those things, yes, it can enhance well-being, but there's other advantages. So one interesting advantage is that it can enhance your creativity as well. So there's an interesting study by the psychologist Kaylee Main, where what she found was that if you change your environment and simply change the room that you're working in. So, for example, you're working in the office and you move to the kitchen, then you take a walk outside, then you come back. What she found is that if you do that, there's a boost in people's ability to solve things creatively every time they make that change. Now, granted, the boost only lasts for about 6 minutes, but during those 6 minutes, you might have that eureka moment. And one of the reasons that she suggests for this is that you are dishabituating yourself. The moment you're moving to another room or another environment, now you have different inputs coming into your brain, right? You're seeing different things, you're hearing different things, and your brain is more open to taking things in, and that can actually enhance the ability to come up with creative solutions.
I read that and I felt validated, because when I'm writing, sometimes I work at the computer, but often I'm printing out some pages and pasting around the house or going outside or taking it with me when I travel. And I find that actually the best work is almost never when I'm standing at the computer. It's when I've taken it with me into a different environment.
Yeah, and I have the same exact experience. So when I think about the most important kind of ideas or solutions that I came up with in my work, in my scientific work, it's always when I was not in my office, not in front of my computer, right? I was just at the moment that I was doing something else. So one kind of example that comes to mind, I was trying to solve this problem and I was on my computer. I couldn't figure it out. There's some kind of data and I couldn't figure out why it's looking the way it is. So I decided to just leave and go to the gym. And so I walked outside, and before I got to the gym, so within those 6 minutes, that's when I came up with this solution. And it was a solution that actually led to, years of research. So a line of research that was very important for me in my lab. And it wasn't that I was trying to solve the problem while I was walking to the gym. To the contrary, I don't think I was. But what happens is that you're encoding all this information. And then once you're changing your environment, you're changing, your physical state and just what's around you. This information is kind of like consolidating in your head and perhaps interacting with other things around you in different ways that can enhance the likelihood of finding a solution or coming up with some kind of creative idea.
Speaking of creativity, there's something else I want you to talk about if you're up for it. And you kind of referenced it earlier, but I think it's worth coming back to. You talked about how some people have trouble habituating to negative changes in their life or difficult changes in their life, and that's often correlated with depression, or maybe the other way around. If you have depression, you have trouble habituating. However, what you haven't yet mentioned, and it's related to creativity, and you do talk about this in your book, is that often in those periods of struggle with habituation, there is simultaneously unhappiness and creativity. So can you talk a little bit about that phenomenon and why you believe it's come about?
Yeah, it's interesting because, as you said, on one hand, people with problems in habituation, that is related to mental health problems. However, at the same time, people who habituate slower are also more creative. So you can measure people's habituation rate in many ways. For example, you can play them the same sound over and over again, and then test to see their conscious response to the sound, but also arousal responses. Like you can measure their skin conductance response, right? So that's one way to measure the rate of habituation. Are you continuing to respond to the same sound or not? And there was a study that was conducted, and I think this was at Harvard, and they found that people who habituate slower, using this measure, they tend to be more creative in the sense that those were the individuals who perhaps had a book under their name, a patent under their name. They had an exhibition. So there's this interesting relationship between slow habituation and creativity. And the question is why? And I think the reason is that if you habituate slower, you're less likely to filter information. Sounds, images, smells, knowledge stays in your mind longer. And it certainly can be distracting, but this mismatch of information in your mind can sometimes result in unexpected combinations, right? Because you have this information in your mind for longer. And what can happen is that one piece of information that seems very mundane from one field can then kind of interact with another piece of information that's quite mundane in another field. And when they come together, they create this kind of novel, something new. I mean, you see this often, in technology, often solutions come from biology, right? So these combinations, they can foster creativity. And I think that is why this idea of moving environments can actually also enhance creativity. In fact, there's another interesting study that we mentioned in the book, which is it's been found that when people move from one country to another, they are, for a short amount of time, better at solving problems and puzzles. So as if having to be in this new situation where they're in a state of learning, maybe a different language, everything is new, can actually cause them to be more creative as well.
One of the other things you talk about in the book is how we can resparkle our relationships. There's a quote in the book that, and it's about monogamy, and the quote is, "Habit and routine are anti-aphrodisiacs." So how can we avoid a kind of negative habituation in our committed relationships?
Yeah, so we actually rely on Esther Perel here, the well-known expert in relationships, and she did surveys to see when are people most attracted to their partners. And she says she came up with 2 instances that people are most attracted to their partners. One was when people were away for a certain amount of time and then came back, right? So breaks. The second one was when people saw their partner in a new situation. Perhaps they were talking to some strangers. Perhaps they were on a stage when normally they wouldn't be on a stage. So that's variety and novelty. So basically she, in her surveys, and she doesn't necessarily use these words, but what she's saying is, to enhance your attraction, to kind of, you want breaks. And this doesn't mean a break in a relationship. It could just be like an evening away, right? And you want variety in the sense that instead of doing the same thing over and over and over again, right, going to the same restaurants, doing the same thing, you might want to include some diversity. At the same time, it is important to have these experiences that you can rely on, right? The experiences that don't change, those are important too. They probably create the kind of connection and history. But at the same time, variety can be helpful because that causes you to see your partner in a new way. I think what often is the case is that people believe they really know those that are close to them, whether it's parents, kids, partners, close friends. Perhaps you have a sense that you know them well, but you never really know someone as closely that you think you do. And I think putting people in these new situations can get that feeling of, ooh, there's something here that I still don't know. So then there's something to learn.
I'm smiling a bit because, and I apologize to any of the listeners who've heard me tell this story before, but what you're saying reminds me of a time when I stepped off stage after giving a talk. My wife made a joke. She said, "I like you so much better publicly." It makes much more sense in light of what you're describing.
It's less familiar, right?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. It's I'm doing and saying different things than I do around the house.
Right.
So we've been talking mostly about habituating to the positive things in our life in a way that kind of dulls our ability to appreciate and be grateful. On the flip side of the coin, you argue that while we should chop up the good, we should swallow the bad whole. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. So if there are tasks that you need to do which are aversive, perhaps it's household chores, perhaps it's doing your taxes, admin. For me, might be like grading papers. Habituation is actually your friend because the negative reaction to these things will habituate over time. So they'll feel less and less negative. So the same people who did these experiments with the music or the massage, they also did an experiment with an unpleasant noise. And they had either an unpleasant noise beginning to end, like no interruptions, it's just really annoying noise, or they had little breaks. And of course, everyone said, I want a break. I don't want to hear this unpleasant noise for how long? 10 minutes. I want breaks. But again, people's intuition was wrong. And when they did the experiment, they found that those that listened to the annoying noise from beginning to end, no interruptions, they suffered less because they tended to habituate. Just they wouldn't notice the noise as much. So noise is one example, but I think it's also true for other things. You have to do, you don't like it, and sometimes it's just better to get it over and done with.
I'm just moving through various topics in the book because it's also interesting. So this next one is a little bit of a non sequitur, but I'm looking down at my list of notes, and it's something I really do want to hear you talk about, which is social media. And specifically, you have a chapter or a section called "How to Wake Up from a Technologically Induced Coma." What's the advice there?
Yeah, so I think a lot of us have this sense that social media may have a negative impact on us. Maybe you have a sense it's probably causing you a little bit of anxiety and stress, not for all of us, but I think for many. But we don't really know to what extent social media has a negative effect because it's always there. It's really hard to assess the impact of different things in your life if they're always there. It's you don't really realize the impact. You can think about it, social media, a little bit again like a bit of an AC in the background, right? There's this noise in the background, but you don't really notice it. It has a negative impact on you, but you don't realize why until someone turns it off, and then you say, "Oh, I feel so much better. I didn't realize what a negative impact this had on me." So it turns out it's the same with social media. When you take a break, when you close, when you shut it down for a while, it turns out it has quite a positive impact on people. So one study that I like a lot is by the economist Hans Alcott. And what he did is he had two groups of people, and I think 1,000 individuals in each group, and he gave one group $100 each to go off Facebook. It's an old study, so specifically on Facebook, to go off Facebook for a month. And the other group, he paid them $100 each to just continue what they're doing. No need to change. And then he came back at the end of the month, and he found that on every measure that he had, people that went off Facebook felt better. They were happier. They were less depressed, less sad. They're more likely to have interactions in person. They're more likely to read books, play the piano. And I think the most interesting thing was that how surprised people were of the impact. You know, he has a lot of quotes in this study of people saying, "Oh, I didn't expect to have such a positive impact on me." So they didn't really realize until they tried it out. Now, another surprising part of this experiment was that despite the fact that most people at the end of the month said, "I'm feeling better," and so on, they went straight back to Facebook. After the experiment. There's some things in our life that we realize consciously are not good for our well-being, are not good for happiness, but for some other reasons, we still do them, right? It could be a little bit like addiction. So addiction is characterized by this sense that you're doing something that you don't even enjoy, you don't even like, but you have a drive, something is driving you towards it. In the sense of social media, it could also be something as simple as I need the information, right? I want to be in the know. I understand it's reducing my happiness, but I want to have this information for professional or personal reasons.
Another takeaway vis-a-vis social media in the book is it's not about what you consume, but how much of it. It's more about what you consume than how much of it. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's been a lot of conversation about social media and its impact on well-being. And there's a lot, there's people saying it has a negative effect. The other people are saying, well, the literature is quite mixed. Do we really know what's going on? I think part of the problem is that most of the research, not all, but most of the research is measuring what's the easiest thing to measure, which is how frequently we go online or go on social media and how much time we spend, right? That's the easiest thing to do. And I don't think that is the most important thing to measure. And I will explain in a minute. And the other problem, the reason that the literature is so murky is that researchers tend to look at everyone together, right? While what we found, and I'll tell you about this in a second, is that whether social media or internet, web browsing, and so on has positive or negative effect on you depends on some of your characteristics. Okay, so I'll tell you about our study. It's just one example, but I think there's probably other examples. What we found is that people who have more mental health problems, more symptoms, tend to go online and search for things with more negative connotations. So what we did is we asked people to go online and just do whatever they usually do. Browse the internet like they usually do that for 5 days, and then send us the history of their web browsing. So now we have all their history of the web browsing. We go into all the websites that they looked at. We take the text out of the website and we use an analysis to see how many positive words and how many negative words in this text. So we have kind of a measure of the valence of the information that they consumed. And we also had measures of their psychological health. And we found, first, as I said, that people with more symptoms within mental health, especially, well, I mean, it was really a huge range of symptoms. They're more likely to go and search things that tend to end up to being negative, and that negative information then makes their symptoms worse. We were able to show that the relationship between the two things is not only correlational. It's not only the mental health is related to consuming more negative information and negative information is related to worse mental health, but we were able also to then in another study manipulate the type of information that people consumed by delivering either more negative or positive web pages and showing that that had an impact on people's mood. So if you consume more negative information that we give you, that reduces your mood. So I think it's important to not just look at how long you're online, but what are you doing? What information you're consuming? What is the content? And also, which population are we talking about, right? They are populations that are more vulnerable. They're more likely to go online and consume things that are worse for them. And that worse information is a bit of a feedback loop that makes the situation worse.
It seems like if we want to not be sucked into social media in such a way that it's, deadening our capacity to enjoy our actual lives, if it's leading to a kind of unhealthy habituation, the two main takeaways that I'm hearing from you are, one, take a break for a while and see how it goes. And two, monitor or pay attention to what you're consuming, even if you're going to continue using it.
Yeah. And I think, the idea of breaks from social media in order to just measure for yourself, what is the impact? It's true for many other parts of life. In fact, the last chapter in the book is called Experiments in Living. And the idea is that we can't really tell what's good for us, what's bad for us if we don't do experiments, right? Just like science, you don't know what's true until you do the experiments and measure the impact. And that is something that we can do in our own life. We need to experiment in living, try different things. Now, some of the things are not going to be good for us, and some of the things will be good for us, but we have to do the experiments in order to find what are things that are optimal, what are things that are not so great. And of course, we can't try everything in life, so sometimes we do need to rely on the experience of others as well. But part of the idea, we talked a lot about diversity and variety. Part of the idea of variety is that, sure, you might try things and you won't like them and they won't be great, but you never know until you try, right? So exploring a little bit more and experimenting a little bit more may lead to you to find, these things that are constantly in my life, I really should maybe do less of or perhaps eliminate altogether. And it could be different for different people.
The book dwells quite a bit on the subject of lying. Why?
Okay, so first, I think it's an interesting effect, but second, it's really the study that triggered the whole book. So it's a study that we conducted. It was out in 2016, and basically what it shows is that when people start lying, they lie more and more and more. So they dishabituate to their own lying. And the reason is that most people feel that lying and dishonesty and doing immoral things are bad, right? Lying is a bad thing. That's what most people feel. And because of that, they feel pretty bad when they lie. And that negative feeling curbs our dishonesty. We did an experiment where we brought people into our lab in pairs, and they had an opportunity to lie. And we didn't tell them that they should lie, but they could figure out from the experiment that if they lied, they would gain more money at the expense of the other person. And what we find is at the beginning, they lied by just a little bit, by a few cents. And then over the hour of the experiment, they lied by more and more and more and more. So their dishonesty kind of escalated. And while they were doing that, we in fact we scanned their brain activity. So they were in the brain imaging scanner, but they could interact with the other person using the computer. And what we find at the beginning, despite the fact that they lied by just a little bit, there was strong activity in the amygdala, which is part of the brain that is important for emotions. So it seemed like at the beginning they lied by a little bit, but they felt really, really bad. But then as they lied more and more, emotional habituation kicked in, right? Emotional habituation is simply the phenomena by which you feel less and less. In this case, you feel less and less bad to things that are repeated. So they continued lying, but they felt less bad. And because they felt less bad, there was nothing stopping their dishonesty. So they lied more the next opportunity that they got. So this really suggests that we want to stop lying and dishonesty. One way to do that is by noticing even those small digressions, because if we let those go, they can actually escalate over time.
There's a section in the book called How to Keep Your Child from Growing a Long Nose. That caught my attention just because I have a 9-year-old, and 9-year-olds, I think this is developmentally normal, experiment with fibbing. And so what's the parenting advice there?
So I think it is to call out your child when they are lying. Because even if the lies are small lies, right? Because I think if we don't, then it can sort of become a habit. What was interesting in our study was that this escalation of lying and the emotional habituation that came along with it was only the case when people lied for their own benefit and at the expense of another person. So interestingly, when someone lied for the benefit of someone else, we didn't see this. And I think the reason is if you're lying for the benefit of someone else, you're less likely to feel bad about it. It doesn't necessarily feel as immoral, maybe. And so there's no negative feeling that kind of like goes down over time. So for lying for, you might think about like these white lies. Maybe someone brings your child a present and he says, "Thank you, I like it a lot." And he doesn't like it. This is a sort of white lie. And those, it's a little bit of a balance here. On one hand, well, should we not mention those? On the other hand, our research show that if you're lying for the benefit of someone else, that is less problematic and less likely to cause escalation.
One of the other things you talk about in the book is how we can habituate to sort of, I guess, what I'm calling negative or pernicious macro trends. You write a lot about Germans in the 1930s getting used to the onset of the Nazis, and also about how we can become sort of numb to bigotry or inequality in the larger culture. How can we avoid this?
This kind of relates to this idea that there are maladies in our societies, and if those maladies have been around us for a long time, we tend to perhaps not see them as clearly. And racism and sexism is one example, but also things that just escalate very, 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 very slowly, right? So the Nazi regime is one such example that they didn't start off with the final solution, but they started off with little steps. And then as you get used, whether those, to the those steps, the next step just doesn't seem as, terrible, because it's just like another step. And we have, quite a few quotes, from, and this was taken from different sources of individuals who were in Germany during this time. And there's one wonderful quote by a German citizen who says, and talking about the Nazi regime, each step was so small, so inconsequential, so well explained, or on occasion so regretted, that people could no more see it developing from day to day than a farmer in his field sees a corn growing. One day it is over his head, right? So the corn grows really, really, really slowly, and you just don't see it until it's kind of over your head. I don't think we have a solution to this per se, but what we have noticed is that often change can happen with what we call dishabituation entrepreneurs. So these are people that, for whatever reason, and we speculate what these reasons may be, are first able to observe these situations, and two, which is as important, are also able to dishabituate other people, to alert other people and make them see what perhaps is unseen. A lot of these times, the dishabituation entrepreneurs are in fact the victims themselves, but not always. It doesn't necessarily have to be the case. I think if you are the victim, you're still dishabituating, but you may be dishabituating less. And let me give you an example of this, why this may be. So let's take a simple example. The fact that you walk on a plane, nowadays it's less so, but still the case. When you walk on a plane and you kind of look at the cockpit, mostly you see a male pilot. And so anytime you see the male pilot, your brain is not even kind of taking notice of it, right? It's what the brain is expecting a male pilot. And when it's getting the information it expected, there's no surprise signal. And so you don't notice it. And then the second thing your brain probably does, it probably comes up with a reason for why the data in front of you, in this case, males in the pilot in the cockpit, why it is a case. And, your brain will probably come to the conclusion that probably males are better at being able to navigate and control very large machinery. And it may actually impact your actions. So, for example, if you need to hire people to take care of large machinery in the future, you might be more likely to hire males. Now, here's what happens when you're the victim, meaning, let's say you are the female pilot and you are impacted by the fact that you may know that people around you suspect that you may be less likely or less competent to be able to control this big machine. But your daily experience is different. So when you're in there in the cockpit and you're controlling the big plane, you're doing a good job, perhaps. And that piece of information goes against the expectations, and it creates what we call a prediction error. It creates kind of a surprise signal, and that makes it less likely for you to habituate to these expectations around you. And I think that's one of the reasons why victims are more likely to see the things that perhaps others can't. And then, the question is, who are the people who are then actually going to be able to dishabituate others? And how are they going to do it? So one example that I like is that we talk about in the book is by a Princeton professor by the name of Yael Neeve. And she noticed, she's a neuroscientist, and she noticed that when she goes to conferences, she sees more male speakers and female speakers. And she wanted to do something about it. And so what she did is she created a website, and the website is called Neurobias or Neurowatch, I think. And if you go on the website, what you see is there's a list of conferences, and next to each conference is the ratio of female to male speakers in that specific conference, and also the ratio of female to male in that specific subfield. So for example, it could be that the ratio of speakers is 1 female for every 5 males, but she has data, and her data shows that the actual ratio of females to male in the field at large perhaps is 3 to 4. Right. So it's a clear signal to others that something here isn't quite right. And what she does on top of that, she names the people who are organizing the conference. And by doing that, she is making them accountable. And no one wants their name together with some data that suggests some kind of discrimination. And so that website was very, very effective in creating more equality with speakers, in this case, in the field of neuroscience. But it could be done in any field, right? You can think about ways to do it in any way you can do it in journalism, in arts. So finding ways to make those things apparent to others once you see them yourself.
We're basically out of time, but I'm curious if I can sneak one last question in here. What, after having done this research and then writing the book, how has your life changed? What are your techniques for resparkling?
I think I'm a dishabituation junkie. Even before I wrote this book, I was a dishabituation junkie. I do get bored quite easily. It doesn't mean that I don't finish projects. I do, but I very much need variety and diversity. I live in 2 different places, 2 different countries. I work on different types of projects. And variety and diversity is something that is always been something that I did kind of naturally. I think now I have a good excuse for it. I have a scientific reason why this may be helpful. But also, I think maybe in parts of my life that I'm less likely to do it, it may drive me to kind of try other things to create more change as well.
Two final questions before I let you go. These are quick. One is there somewhere you were hoping to go during this interview that we didn't get to?
No, I think we managed to touch upon many different things.
Okay, so then the final question is, can you just plug the book and any other books you've written and any other stuff you want us to know about?
Sure. So the latest book is Look Again, and that is co-authored with Cass Sunstein. And my other two books are The Influential Mind and The Optimism Bias. And there's a lot of materials on my lab website, which is affectivebrain.com, affective with A. So you can find talks and you can find essays for, popular in popular journals, but also you can find the kind of scientific articles for those who want to read those as well.
Tali Sharot, thank you very, very much for coming on. Appreciate it.